Welcome to the Dystopian Renaissance. We cover spirituality, healing, consciousness, and truth. In this chaotic world we live in, it's important to get out of the matrix, and we'll do just that with biohacking, nutrition, spiritual awakenings, alternative healing, and freedom. This is the Dystopian Renaissance, and this is your host, Johnny Sage.
I'm sitting today with Bhikkhu Jayasara, also known as Bhante J, and he's a Theravadic Buddhist monk. So, when did all this start, your foray into Buddhism or spirituality in general?
So, I guess what I would say in terms of spirituality, I was raised Catholic and I was raised in the church, and by the time I was 16, I knew it wasn't my thing. And I kind of, even though I couldn't quite leave it just then, in my mind, I knew I wasn't a Catholic. And for a long time, I kind of didn't really feel like I needed a spiritual journey. I was just a regular person doing regular things. And although I always consider myself like a student of all religions and spiritualities, and a practitioner of none. I like to learn, my major in college was like anthropology, and I like to learn about these things. So I would study various religions, various spiritual practices, even stuff like Wicca and things like that. Basically, like as I got closer to 30, that kind of spirit, that desire arose in me to have a spiritual path, a spiritual journey. And at that point, I knew it was going to be Buddhism. I didn't know what kind of Buddhism. There was no thoughts of me being a monk back then. That would come much later. But this was something that arose in me, and I decided, okay, I know I want to, explore Buddhism. And then I went through this process of learning all the different sects of Buddhism and trying to find places nearest to me that I could do this, learn about Buddhism and go to temples and meet monks and things like that. And, growing up in the 90s, there was lots of all these, you see movies about like Tibetan Buddhists and stuff about the Dalai Lama. And I remember watching that. So like my idea was like, I remember in these movies, there's always these like happy Buddhist monks. So let me go try to find some. I want to learn from them. And so then that led me to the tradition called Theravada, which is mostly found in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, or Myanmar, Laos. And Westerners tend to think it's the oldest type of Buddhism, and in some ways it is, but it's also not. It's a lot more complicated than that. But that is pretty much what I did once I found Theravada, and I found a place only an hour or so from me, and I would go there and learn. And but mostly I was just by myself, just found monks, happy, smiling monks on YouTube, and, started listening to them and things like that. And that kind of started my Buddhist journey. And, that growth of my desire to have some kind of a spiritual path.
And was there one monk in particular that you resonated with when you were just listening to him online? Or was it an assortment of them?
Well, back then, so we're talking 2008-ish, 2007, 2008, there wasn't that many monks online. It grew over time, but, and including myself now as one of them. But the main monastic, I would say, his name is called Ajahn Brahm. And he's within Theravada, within Buddhism, he's pretty well known. He does a lot of talk and a lot of teachings to Buddhist people, but also he does a lot of reach out to people who are kind of, I guess what you call Buddhist curious or investigating it, that kind of stuff. And he's very, talks a lot about, kindness to yourself and things like that, which I needed because I was very, very critical of myself. Had a very critical mind, and when I started to meditate, and my mind would say, "Oh God, you're horrible at this. You're a bad meditator." These kind of things, and I needed somebody to kind of say, "No, that's normal." Right? That's absolutely normal. What's happening in your mind, right? And now I'm that person that tells other people this, because when they come and tell me this, is like, "Oh, my mind is this or my mind is that. I'm a horrible meditator." So, nope, that's it. So Ajahn Brahm, he was that first one that really helped me kind of break through and really help my meditation practice and really get me deeper into Buddhism.
And you mentioned the critical mind. Why do you think we're, like, a lot of us are like that? Like, we talk or have thoughts about ourselves that are harsher than we have about most other people, even if, like, we don't like them. Why do you think we're like that? Do you think it's the way we're raised? Humans are naturally like that?
I think there's different levels of it from culture to culture, but I think it's something that's in our evolution. I think that it is something that, like, when you think about, this is the anthropologist in me coming out, things like this. But when you think about in ancient times, when we were just small groups of people, fitting in with the group and doing things the right way and things like that was very important, because if you were ostracized from the group, you were done. You couldn't survive on your own. So there's this mindset of, like, what am I doing wrong? Always negative. Like, and so I think that most people have it to different degrees. And I think this is something that when you understand that, this is a normal part of my mind, then, and the more you see the mind, the deeper you get into meditation and spirituality and understanding reality of what's going on, you realize, oh, okay, I don't just have to listen to everything this tells me, right? This negative mind.
Yeah, because not all our thoughts are true, right?
Oh yeah. No. Well, one of the things, and this surprises people, because people think it's the opposite. But one of the things that I've been meditating now 16 years, something like that. And one thing that I tell people is our perceptions are completely untrustworthy. I mean, that doesn't mean necessarily that they're always wrong, but you have to question your perceptions. And if your mind is telling you something, you say, well, is it true? Right? That's part of being an investigator, like a meditator. In Buddhism, that's a big thing, investigation, right? This thing that comes into my mind, where does it come from, right? How valid is it? Do I really have to accept it? Do I have to follow it? Do I have to let it oppress me? Which we do. We let our mind states oppress us a lot.
Yeah, because the mind just comes up with thoughts from pretty much the moment we're born and keeps going until we die. And it's just rattling thoughts off one after the other. And I think we take that for granted that, whatever you're thinking, generally, if you're not Buddhist, you're not really analyzing it or doing some type of meditative practice. So I think you just kind of take it as true and just listen to it, even if it's going off in your subconscious.
Yeah. Well, I think, this part, like this investigation part, it's not necessarily just Buddhist. To a certain degree, I did similar things before I was a Buddhist. I've always been inclined to kind of question and investigate. But I think especially for me, the most ancient teachings, the very simple practical teachings that the Buddha gives, kind of is like a plan. It's like, okay, well, this is how you investigate your mind, and that kind of the investigation that I was already kind of inclined to doing became supercharged because I had good directions.
And was it hard having a meditation practice before you went in a monastery, like when you were first exploring this?
Surprisingly enough, I tell people in many ways my meditation practice was better when I was a layperson than since I've become a monk.
Is that because you have more responsibilities?
Well, it's a different, in many ways, it's a different level. But yeah, it's a complete, there's the aspect of it being a complete life change than what you're used to, different responsibilities, different environment. So that kind of throws you for a loop for a while. But, you know, and interestingly enough also, like I was able to set my lay life up that I minimized lots of my suffering. Like Buddha says, don't hang around with foolish people. And, you know, I didn't hang around with foolish people. I avoided, I mean, sometimes you can't, like your coworkers and things like that, but like I minimized, you know, my contact with them. And I tried to structure my life in such a way that, you know, I could develop my skillfulness and develop my meditation and all of these things. You know, it worked out pretty well, and I got very peaceful and very calm. And then I go to a place where I have no control over my environment. You know, I have no control over the people that are at the monastery and all of these kind of things. And that causes me suffering, right? Because when we have no control, we want to control things. And when we can't control it, it causes suffering. So, you know, for a variety of factors that happened. But now, I mean, I've been in robes now 6 years, and it's starting to flip around. It's starting to be better. You know, I've heard like first couple of years, you know, 4 or 5 years is usually pretty rough. But, you know, so, but I guess that would be, yeah, that's what I'd say to that.
Do you think because you mentioned your practice, at least partly joking, was better at lay life. Do you think there's some type of beginner's luck with meditation? Because I've known people that got into it pretty early and just did it like once or twice, and they had some profound experience, like just right off the bat, that sometimes when you're doing a daily practice or something, can become routine rather than it can become boring, or you're just not excited about it. So I guess this is 2 questions. Like, one, the beginner's luck, and how do you keep it fresh, like when you've been doing it for so long?
So yeah, there's definitely beginner's luck. There's definitely, I've experienced that. Not well, although my experience was more like 5 years into it. You know, it was interesting. Like you know, there's different levels in Buddhism of how deep you can go in what we call samadhi, like a stillness of mind and concentration and things like that. And at my desk at work before work one day, I just entered into this like deep state, and I realized, how the heck did I get here? I didn't know how I got. So like, you know, I got to a point where like usually only very advanced people get. And I didn't know how I got there, and it went away, and I've not been there since. Right. So it was just the causes and the conditions arose for me to get to that point. And then it went away. And now I know how to get there, and it's a lot of work to get there. You know, it's like, so I had a beginner's luck. Like it just worked out perfect that I had that one experience. And that happens, you know, throughout the meditation practice. You'll have these insights, and you'll feel like your life is totally changed. You feel like, this is amazing. I'm seeing the world in a way I've never seen it before. You know, and this is one of the things where like you get a lot of kind of people who get deluded and think they're like awakened or enlightened or things like that, because they have these experiences. But in my experience, they come for a time, but then they kind of fade away, and you remember them. And so that is, you know, kind of a trap that somebody can fall into, is especially early. Like if you get all these things, and then maybe like the next 2 or 3 years you're meditating and you don't have those wonderful experiences, and you're just like, well, what happened? Right? So the problem is the work is really in the day-to-day. The work is like the question, keeping it fresh, right? That is the actual work. That is the hard part, right? The easy part is stumbling upon something, right? But then afterwards you have suffering because you want to go back. It's like, oh, I want this experience again. I want this experience again. And then you can't get back there. You don't know how to get back there at all. Right? And so in terms of keeping it fresh, it's interesting. There's this my preceptor, Bhante J, who the preceptor is a monk who ordained me and trained me, he would say, like, if the breath is boring, you're doing it wrong. Right? And so the average person, even when I first heard that, I was like, breath doesn't seem that interesting to me. Like mindfulness of breathing, like following the breath coming in and out. But then, after a couple of years, I actually understood. I was like, oh, okay, you can get into these states where you become so peaceful and calm and happy. You're just happy to be there, right? And so the trick in a way is to kind of find that state in your meditation practice in general, right? Not to have any expectations. That's important, right? In Zen, they call it beginner's mind, right? So like, sitting down every time you meditate, whether it's sitting, walking, whatever it is, making sure you have no expectations at all for what is going to happen in your meditation, right? It's important for beginners, especially also making sure you don't have any expectations. Like, I want this, don't do any of that. Just do the practice. And what will happen is you can be surprised at what arises, right? That kind of surprise and builds like a curiosity. And that curiosity leads you to want to investigate. And really, it's the investigation that kind of keeps you going, because if you feel like there's nothing left to investigate, then you get bored. Then you're just, oh, this practice is boring. All I'm doing is sitting there following my breath. I'm not doing anything, right? So in that regard, it's important to kind of make sure that you are not sabotaging yourself with any expectations or strong desires about what you feel the meditation should be first off. Now just go into the meditation. I'm going to sit and I'm going to meditate. And I'm not going to call this meditation a good meditation or a bad meditation. I'm just going to let it be a meditation. That's it. And that will cut off a lot of the problems right off the top. And then, if you've been meditating for a couple of years and things get stale, it's not a bad idea to try different things. Try different techniques. And like my meditation, I don't think I've ever had my meditation be stale. And the reason being is because my meditation has always included a variety of different things. It's not just I'm going to sit down on the cushion and follow my breath. I do walking meditation. In Buddhism, we have mindfulness of death meditations. We have what's called metta meditation, where we, practice developing thoughts of goodwill for all beings. So there's like a wide variety of practice other than sit down, cross your legs, and follow your breath. And, an hour of meditation for me might be 20 minutes of walking, 10 minutes of metta and mindfulness of death meditation, and a half hour of sitting, that kind of stuff. So I've always been, good at kind of mixing that up and, having all these different factors. And speaking of even going back to what we were talking about, the negative mind, there's a practice that the Buddha teaches is called sila nusati. And so nusati means to contemplate. Sila means your virtue, your goodness, right? So the Buddha gave us a practice of contemplating our good deeds. He didn't give us a practice of contemplating our bad deeds or being negative. Why? Because we're already negative. It's already there. It's already in our mind, that criticism and the negativity. So to counteract that, practice reflecting on the good deeds you've done, right? So there's a lot of different aspects in the Buddhist practice that kind of make sure that you're not too, that you minimize that kind of staleness. What you don't want to get into is, and I've seen this a lot from people kind of become spiritual window shoppers, right? They go shallowly, and I'm going to try this practice for a month or a week, and I'm going to try that practice and this. And like, I remember meeting a guy at a mindful, where I was from at Bhavana. We had introduction to meditation retreats that I would teach. And I had a group interview, and there was an older gentleman. He may be 60, 65, 70. And I went around and I asked people, like, how long have you been meditating? And people were like 5 months, a year, and he's like 40 years. So I'm thinking, okay, he's been meditating as long as I've been alive. Why is he at a beginner meditation retreat? And that's why, because he kind of, dabbled in all of these things over all that time, but he never went deep, right? So you have to be careful of getting into that trap. You have to be careful of not following kind of like, if you're bored, oh, I want to try this. This is boring. I'm going to try something else, right? Because that is actually following your, what we call in Buddhism, your defilements. That's following your craving. That's actually following your suffering. It's creating suffering. So you kind of like, there's this one famous monk, Ajahn Chah, who's the Ajahn Brahm's teacher, who I mentioned. And he said, if you feel good, meditate. If you feel bad, meditate, right? If you're excited, meditate. If you're bored, meditate, right? It doesn't matter what, what that kind of feeling is, you still do the practice anyway. And when you do that and, you understand this, okay, well, so it's just going to be a roller coaster. It's just going to be up and down. There's going to be whole weeks where I don't want to meditate at all, right? And even still as a monk, after 16 years, there's days or a week where I was just like, I'm kind of done. I'm just going to be lazy, right? And then after that happens, I get back on, say, okay, now it's time to get back. And, but if you reach the point where it becomes part of your life, part of who you are, like, hey, I'm such and such, I do yoga, I work here, I do this, right? I'm a Buddhist, I meditate, then it's always going to be there. Like, even, years ago as a layperson, after I meditated for enough time, like, even if I skipped a couple days, there'd be a part of me that's like, let's get back to meditating. Like, there's a part of my mind that just says, let's go back. So if you get to that point, then even if it starts to feel boring and all these things, then you always will go back. You'll always, figure out what you need to do. You always investigate. Maybe if the breath is boring, maybe you need to investigate something else. Maybe you need to look at something else, so long as you don't fall into the trap of doing that, being a spiritual window shopper.
When you were considering renouncing, how did you know? Did you visit a lot of monasteries first, besides like listening to talks and everything? Like, how'd you know where you were going to ordain at? What drew you there?
So I didn't know. It took me a while to find out where I was going to ordain at, because there just wasn't much opportunity in my tradition and where I was originally from in New Jersey, and I guess what happened was that I was visiting a place, a small, what they call vihara, a dwelling place for monastics in New Jersey, and they told me about Bhavana Society, where I ordained. And it was 5 hours and 4 states away, but I said, okay, this sounds like a good place. Let me give it a shot. So I went, and by that point I had already, the desire to become a monastic had already arisen about a year before that. And when I went there, and I went there for a retreat, and at the end I was like, okay, this is my home. This is where I'm going to ordain. Like, this is where I want to be. And after that, the next 3 years, whenever I had time off work, I would just go there. For a 4-day weekend, take my vacation week and go there for a retreat and things like that. But that kind of developed, and I think I forgot the first part of the question that you asked. It was something about how I got into wanting to be a monastic, or I don't remember.
Just what opened in you that you were like, oh, I gotta actually become a monk. I can't just be a lay monk in my regular life. I want to be at a monastery and do this full time.
Mm-hmm. So it was 2010 when I first had the inkling that I wanted to become a monastic. I had been a Buddhist for 2 years at that point. I'd been a meditator for 5, and I had a good life. I had a good life, and I had a good job, and everything was going pretty good in life. But the teachings that I started reading from the Buddha, and my meditation practice started to kind of really bring forth a lot of fruit and in terms of insight and things like that. And I developed a lot of, faith and confidence in the teachings and in the Buddha. And it made me kind of think, well, maybe I want to be that happy, smiling monk that I always was attracted to. Like, maybe that's what I want to be. Maybe that's what I want to do. And so so that was 2010. And 2014 is when I moved to the monastery to become a monastic. I didn't know of Bhavana at the time when I first decided. So what I did was, there was a local place, and not in my tradition, Mahayana tradition, not Theravada, but I went there, and I, with any kind of monastic I was able to talk to, I'd just ask advice. What's your advice for somebody who wants to ordain? What should I do? And they'd give me different pieces of advice. One that was very good was like, find a place that you can visit and see how they live, and they can get to know you. And then if if it works out, you go and you become a monk there. And I didn't have a place like that at the time. Bhavana would then be that place, a year, 2 years later. And then another one monk who was very important to me on my path, even though I only met him 2 days. He was at my first retreat. He taught me walking meditation, which was a very big thing for me. But his advice was very Zen, and I didn't understand it for a couple years. But then right before I was ordaining, I understood it. He said, become a monk when not becoming a monk and becoming a monk are the same in your mind. And again, I didn't understand. I was like, is that like a Zen koan? You're like a Theravada monk. What's going what's going on with that? And but I understood. It was, what he was saying is, when you're okay being a layperson or a monastic, you can be a monastic, right? And so I understood that, because I was okay. Like, even, I was going forth to become a monastic. I got to the point where I knew, like, I had to try this, or else I would regret it later on in life. If I didn't try it, I don't know how long I'm going to be a monk, if I'd even become a monk at that point, because it is a process. It's not easy to become a monk. You have to be accepted, and you have to meet certain criteria and things like that. So it's not just like anybody can become a monk. So I didn't know I was going to actually make it to that point then. And so, but I figured, I need to do this. I don't know how it's going to end up, but I know that I'll regret it later in life if I don't at least try. Then that started me, once I found out about Bhavana, visiting, and then, as I said, yeah.
There's something to what you said, and I've noticed that in my life, on a lot of my journeys, not even just my personal or not even my spiritual and healing one, but just there's something that I've wanted to try, and it might not work out. It might not go as pictured. I might fail at it, but then I can say, well, at least I tried it and it wasn't for me. And that helped kind of get me on the path I'm supposed to be on. So I think there's definitely something to trying things, even if they don't always have a happy ending or wasn't as good as you pictured it. But I think that helps when you're trying to find out like what's for you and which way you're really supposed to be headed.
No, I agree 100%. Like I said, when I was talking about when I was a student of all religions, like, I'd go to a Jewish temple, a mosque, a Hindu temple. I even became friends with Wiccans. I was like, and they promised me magic, and I love magic, but I never saw any. Or else maybe I'd still be a Wiccan to this day. But, so I think that is important. You have to, when I found my specific tradition, and when I found the ancient teachings, it felt like the last puzzle piece was put in. It felt like I was coming home. So I knew then that this was my thing. Now, I'm still open to, like, I'll tell people, like, I don't know if I'm going to be a monk for the rest of my life. And I tell people I'm also still open to, there might be some truth, some teaching out there that I've never heard of, which would be quite hard because I've studied a lot of them, but it might be out there, that would cause me to be like, oh, this is more truthful than Buddhism. I'm going to go this way. I'm going to do this instead. But so my mind is, I keep an open mind in that regard, but I've not found anything for me personally, that calls to me and connects with me and makes me feel as fulfilled and meaningful and as happy as this tradition and me being a monastic and stuff like that. And that was the culmination of a journey of exploring different things. So yeah.
Do you think Buddhism could really be the right path for everyone, or that we're all different and there's different right things for us, different journeys, different spiritual practices?
Yeah, no, I think each person has to figure out what's good for them. Like, one of the great things about Buddhism is that it's not like a religion that goes out and tries to convert people and things like that. As a matter of fact, like for me as a monastic, like I literally can't just go up to somebody and start teaching them about the Buddha. There's a literal rule that the Buddha put down that says that for me to teach, I have to be asked to teach. Right. So I make the jokes like I can't go on somebody's door and you go up to somebody's door and knock and say, have you heard the good news of our Lord, Lord Buddha? And interestingly enough, they do the English translations for some of the words they do Lord Buddha is a word, something that's used. So it's a funny connection I make there. So, but no, I can't do that. Right. So, and I do a lot of interfaith stuff, and most of the people that I speak to, especially like at Bhavana Society, which was a retreat center. And I've met thousands of people, and I would say the majority of those people were not Buddhist. They were either Buddhist curious, or they were just like on their path, like I was investigating. And, there's people like people that I have to be careful with this word because some people like it and some people don't, but there's some people, they call themselves Jew-boos, like Jewish Buddhists. There's a word like Chi-boos, or like there's like Christian Buddhists. There's, so Buddhism is kind of in that regard easily kind of merged with other traditions, at least to a point. Like there is a point in Buddhist traditions where you get to the point where it can't really coexist with other religions. But by that point, you're pretty much close to awakening. Like, this is something, because there's something what we call right view. And part of right view, things that the Buddha told us are right view, would not really fit with what other religions believe and say. So there would be that conflict at that point. But, so it's really up to each person to go down their path and to figure out where that path ends. I would never say that Buddhism is for everybody. I would say that everybody could learn something from Buddhism, but you could also learn something from Christianity. I was raised Catholic. I still love the teachings of Jesus. I still, that stuff. So there's still part of that in me, even though I'm a Buddhist. So yeah, each person, should, I think, again, I don't even know if I wouldn't say that each person should have a spiritual journey either. If they don't want to be spiritual, if they don't feel the need, then they don't feel the need. But, if they have a spiritual journey, then, they have to follow the path and see where it leads them.
Yeah, there's some people I just can't see ever being spiritual. And oddly enough, I was probably that person. So I'm like, I could see that for myself. And then I became very spiritual. So maybe there is that hope or inkling in everyone. They do have, I don't think not that they have to, but no one's beyond becoming spiritual in some way, even though at first glance they might look like they're completely based in the physical world and never want to like go a different way. So that's a tough call, because there's some people that are just so involved in, the day-to-day activities like work and sports and TV and going out, that I just can't see them being interested in anything else. But do you think like we all have some potential to get like some spiritual practice, or for some people, not this lifetime?
I would say it definitely depends on the person, but I would say in general, I think we're built to be spiritual. I think that, humans like there's an interesting thing, like, a lot of talk about these days about how, like official religion is kind of dying out in America, but people are getting like, they have like what they call like a God-shaped hole or something like that. Like they're filling it with like ideologies and, justice crusades and all of these kind of things. And I kind of agree with that. There's this, we do have this kind of, there's a part of us that's very rational, very scientific. And there's a part of us that is very spiritual and very kind of, even if we don't maybe believe per se that there is something beyond the material world, we at least would want something to be. Like I was make the joke about the Wiccans. I grew up wanting there to be magic. I always, wish that I could like cast a fireball and do these kind of things, right? But I've never seen it in the world. So it's not as important a truth. If it is a truth, it may be. It's not as important a truth to me as something else like Buddhism. But I do think that everybody has the potential for it. I think that we're in an interesting place. We're kind of evolutionary beings in a novel environment that nobody has had to deal with before. And so we don't know how it's going to go, right? So I think it's very clear, at least in Buddhism, like when you see the Buddha talking to a lot of people back at the time, there were people who were materialists. There were people who believed we just die and that's it, right? People tend to think like our ancestors were stupid and they all just believed in like this, spaghetti monster in the sky and all these kind of things, like some of the atheist people I've heard, right? No, like people have always had a variety of different feelings about this. And, that's part of, their tendencies and their proclivities. And, but I think there is some kind of spiritual aspect of us just in general as human beings. Yeah.
And I know from going to various monasteries, a lot of them were very much different than what I pictured them. I thought they would be just very peaceful and just blissful and really restful, but I didn't always find that was the case. What was your biggest surprise going from like a layperson and visiting a monastery? Was anything different than you were expecting it to be?
No, I would say I basically had the same experience. So, I don't think Asian people, like Buddhist people, have this experience because they kind of are more they grew up around monastics. So, but like Westerners kind of, because of whatever, our pop culture, because, we just kind of have this misconception like that all monks are like perfectly amazing beings and like monasteries are just going to be these places I'm just going to escape all my problems from. And that's just not reality. That's just kind of, that's an idealized hope and expectation that doesn't exist. In Buddhism, the Buddha talks about how we have three things: greed, hatred, and delusion. And this is somewhat similar to like original sin in Christianity. Is like, this is something we've had, we go from life to life. We have attachment, aversion, and delusion. We don't see things rightly, and so we act unskillfully. We act out of our cravings and things like that. And everybody who's not awakened has that, whether you're a layperson or a monastic, whether you're living out in the world or you're living in a monastery that's secluded. A secluded monastery can have just as many problems as, some downtown city, because the people have greed, hatred, and delusion, right? The people have tendencies and delusions that cause themselves and each other suffering. So wherever you go, it's like you have a luggage, baggage, a backpack, and you carry that with you. And even if you decide I'm going to become a monk and I'm going to go to the monastery, and then all of a sudden that's all going to go away, and it doesn't. And then you kind of, then you're stuck, like I was saying before, you're stuck with a bunch of other people who also bring their greed, hatred, and delusion. And it doesn't, it's a hard thing to do. So, yeah.
And do you have any advice for people who are considering possibly becoming a monk at some point? Should they just continue their meditation practice or reading the books or check out various monasteries? Like, what do you think would best prepare someone for the actual life that you're living?
So what I would say is that most people who get into Buddhism and who have practiced enough time, they tend to think about the possibility of ordaining. I think it's a very common thing. But in reality, most people end up not ordaining, and most of the people who are ordained don't stay ordained for life. They disrobe, and it's made that way. It's not a lifetime vow. So what I would say is, especially if you're younger, perhaps, but to get more into the practice, become, develop your Buddhist practice or whatever, meditation and things like that, and see where that brings you, right? Because you can come to a point where you've developed your mind and you've developed what we call nibbida, which is like a disenchantment for the world. It's not a hatred for the world. It's not like I hate people and I hate the world and everybody should just die and now I'm going to be a monk. It's not that. It's like I was saying before, so he's like, this is all good, but it's not that great. I think there's something better, right? And then that kind of like is a push for you to move forward. So to developing that is very important to a successful monastic life. Because I've met many people who become monastics and then they disrobe, and I've only been a monk, 6 years. So it's not like I've been a monk for 20, 30 years. I've met so many people. So yeah. And what I would also suggest is going to monasteries, learning, talking to the monastics, asking advice from them. What do they get? Advice from a bunch of different people, not just one person. And that'll be very helpful, for you to move forward. And, again, in the end, it's a leap of faith. In the end, it's like I was saying before, well, I mean, will you regret this if you don't even try it? But in the end, you don't know. So it is literally a leap of faith. I'm going to, give up all the things I like, TV and movies and all these kind of things. And with the promise that this is going to be beneficial for me. And so it's a leap of faith, and you take it and you see how it lasts. And if it's something that's good for you and you want to stay in it, you stay. And if not, you leave. So, but yeah, talking to as many monastics, getting as much advice and practicing, and, not being too quick to want to leave the world. If you hate the world and people, it's probably not going to be good for you as a monastic, because you're around people. You live supported by people. You literally live by the generosity of others. So it's a little hard, to do that if you're in that kind of nihilistic, kind of very negative mind state.
That definitely makes sense. And what's been one of the biggest joys you've had being a monk? Was it getting to teach others, or have you had any other experiences that were tremendous positives?
Yeah. What I would say is definitely I've done a lot of meaningful things in my life. Like most of the careers in my life were helping people in one way or another, from teaching to social work, child protective services, all that kind of stuff. So I've done a lot of good deeds. When I look back at my lay life, I can say I did a lot of good, or at least I had tried to, as much as one person can. But none of that really compares to the meaning that I get from sharing Dhamma, as we call Buddhism, sharing the Dhamma with people. It's just an amazing thing. And partially because I'm dealing with people who are actually at least want to kind of change themselves and make themselves better. And partially it's because I also see myself in a lot of people. Like I see, I remember that, like that beginning. They're so excited to move forward. And it's like a parent that lives vicariously through their child in a way, living vicariously through children. You see that. It's like, this is great. This is wonderful. So yeah, that is, and continuing down my own path of developing my own insight. It's a dichotomy. It's both of those at once. They work together for a monastic, right? Helping yourself, helping others together. And basically that both leads you down the path towards awakening and happiness, contentment, stuff like that.
And you're teaching / giving talks online too, right? Not just in person at the monasteries?
Well, for most of us monastics the last couple of years, because of COVID, obviously, we've been doing a lot of online things. Many monastics all over the world. And I was a bit of a trendsetter of that because I was an old, computer nerd and internet person. And most of my teaching that I learned was online. But now since COVID, there's so many monastics that are online now. It's exploded on Zoom and things like that. So it's something that because I was able to learn from those few monastics that were up on the internet back then, I feel it's like paying it forward, right? Like, putting my own teachings and stuff like that. And I have like a YouTube channel and a website and all that kind of stuff. And, and it's, when people, send a message and they'll say, Bhante, thank you. You've helped me and you've helped me change my life and things like that. I was just at a monastery and some random person I never met, basically came up to me and said, like, you're basically the reason why I'm here being a monastic. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
That is amazing because you haven't been a monk like 20 to 30 years, as you said, and you've already made a substantial difference in someone's life. So how is that feeling?
Oh, it's great. It's great. Any kind of, whether it's teaching or whatever, it's anything that you can you help somebody help themselves and you see their growth. It's amazing. It's one of the best feelings, to do that. And, it's just like a feeling of gratitude. I get a feeling of gratitude that I can be in this position to do this, to develop myself and to help others develop themselves and things like that.
And where can people find you if they both for your teachings and if they want to reach out to you? Do you prefer social media or your website?
So I am on basically every social media, although I only really use Facebook mostly. I'm definitely on social media, as my website and my YouTube channel. If you just Google my name, it would all come up. If you put my name in YouTube, it will come up. My website is maggaseka.org, but that would be something that's people are like, well, how do you spell that? And so it's MAGGASEKHA.org. And what that means is a student of the path. Magga means the path, the path of spirituality, the path to awakening. And Sekya is like a trainee or a student. So that's kind of like my tagline, my, marketing thing. Monks and monasteries have their name. That's my name, Maggaseka. So. And
I'll list those links too down below, so both where they can contact you and your sites. And I know you mentioned student of the path before. What does that mean to you?
So it was something that actually came to me way back when I first became a Buddhist. I started my YouTube channel back in 2008 because I wanted to make it kind of like my own vlog of me, like going down the spiritual journey. But then I never really did anything with it until I was going down the journey of becoming a monastic, and then I started making videos. The important thing, what it means to me is that it's like you're always a student. Until you've reached the end, until you've become awakened, you're always learning, you're always training, you're always practicing, you're following the path, right? And so what that means to me is like in Buddhism, the main teaching is the Noble Eightfold Path in terms of like the practice that you do day to day, right? And it has 8, it's no time to go into it in detail, but like these 8 factors of this path cover all various aspects of your life, and if you're following that path, you're living that path, right? I tell people you become an avatar of the path. People nowadays know avatars as those blue aliens, but an avatar is basically somebody like something that personifies, like in ancient Europe. They would have like an avatar of virtue, an avatar of humility, kind of a thing like that. So that's where I'm coming from with that. You literally embody and live the path in that.
And is there one last piece of advice you'd like to share, either that we didn't cover or something you want to touch on again, just to reiterate that was important?
I guess I would say don't be too quick to discount any spiritual, any desire for spiritual path. Like if you look, if you're paying attention, you'll probably see it there. Whatever the path is, that's up to you. You have to follow the path and find out. But I think it's important for the whole of a human are all these different parts. And if we kind of throw away the spiritual part, we're going to fill it with something. And it might not be as skillful as, something like Buddhism or, some kind of good, skillful, wholesome spiritual path.
Thank you. And I knew this would go by too fast. So you're always welcome on for part 2 to continue these talks. And I just want to thank you and recommend listeners to you that because you made a difference in my life, both like the support you've given me and just your teachings as well. So they really have made a difference. And I want to thank you for that as well.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to our great guest, Bhante J. Please like, follow, and subscribe so you'll be notified when the next episode is released. We start a Patreon. Any amount you can donate is greatly appreciated. Thank you for tuning in today. Be seeing you.
You've been listening to the Dystopian Renaissance. Spirituality, healing, consciousness, truth. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show. And tell a friend or two. That would help also. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at the Dystopian Renaissance. And please find the website at www.thedystopianrenaissance.com.